Scout's first-hand eyewitness account report reveals the secrets of Custer's last stand, June 25, 1876. The Battle of Little Bighorn, a day marked by fame, bravery, and a mystery that has baffled historians, for George B. Herondines' account isn't just a historical record. It's a glimpse into the heart of the conflict. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel to support our community. I've read Custer's Last Stand. Get ready to uncover the raw emotions and untold truths of a lot of the Little Bighorn battle in the Herald and other papers. Much of it shaped American history. Sit back, relax, and join us on this fascinating journey. I was with Reno during the battle and know what transpired before and after the fight. General Terry let me accompany General Custer on his march up the Rosebud. He told me about this at General Gibbon's tent, and I later saw Terry on the steamer Far West, anchored at the mouth of the Rosebud. He inquired about it in the terrain along the upper part of the Rosebud. I was with General Gibbon's command at the mouth of the Rosebud when Generals Terry and Custer joined us. Although I didn't see everything, I witnessed a great idea and will recount it exactly as I experienced it. I was on the forward deck when I was called to the cabin where I found General Terry. I gave him my information and he expressed his desire for me to join him. I went back to the deck and after traveling through the tunnel, I shared my knowledge with the generals. From their Gibbons, Custer, and Brisbane in a council of war, I understood that Terry was figuring out the best location for Custer and Gibbons' knowledge about the area around Tulloch's Fork and the Little Bighorn. From their Gibbons, Custer, and Brisbane, I was given a map and tried to get my column together, with Custer marching up the Rosebud and Gibbons up the Bighorn. General Gibbons soon approached me to speak. General Custer told me that I could consider myself hired to join him as a scout. Once he gave me his command, I codicated them. He said that they would likely be near the mouth of the Little. This took place on June 21st, and shortly after that, General Gibbons left the boat. General Brisbane's conversation reached the head of Tulloch's Creek, where I was to bring dispatches down the Tulloch to General. I asked him where his cavalry would likely be in the upcoming days, and he emerged from the cabin. We talked about my compensation, but that was the end of 4 crucial Bighorn. I reported to General Custer on June 21st and was assigned to Lieutenant Varnum immediately at 5 a.m. We marched for about 12 miles before setting up camp at 5 p.m. General Custer ordered Prior the bugle to sound a 4th guide, who was with Varnum. On the morning of the 23rd, we set out Boy and Bloody Knife, led the way, accompanied by Custer. Lieutenant Varnum trail that Reno's men had followed a few days. We continued on the trail until 5 p.m. when we set up camp for the night. Shortly after we started, Custer, who was ahead of Boy, called me over and told me to get ready in the morning and continue upstream, following the trail. He said he believed that this would send me and Charlie Reynolds to the head of Tulloch's Fork to scout Tulloch, and I could only follow the trail. I called Boy back and asked if I was wrong, and he agreed, stating that if the bud grew, we would come a gap and could cut ahead. It informed the general that it was too early, as we were still heading toward the head of the Scent Crow Scouts heading to intelligence. On the morning of the 24th, we broke camp at 5 to reach the Tulloch in roughly a 15-mile ride. Custer replied, "I can wait." We hadn't gone very far when the Crow Scouts came running, stopped the command, dismounted the men, and gathered the officers together. Heheta counseled pony tracks. They brought with them the white man's scales, which they had discovered on the beheaded a few days earlier at the mouth of the Rosebud. After hearing this, Custer returned, reporting that the trail ahead was getting fresher and that they had spotted something new. Later, it was determined to belong to Stoker, a soldier from Company H, 2nd Cavalry, who had been with them, but I was too far away to unearth the details. We mounted and proceeded along the trail at a slow pace after a half-hour halt. We soon arrived at the mouth of Muddy Creek, the location of the 2nd Cavalry's battle with Lame Deer's Bee and the lodges, and we wanted to know if any had deviated from the main trail. While Varnum was away, we halted and the men prepared dinner. Here, after about 2 gone up the muddy, we returned, and he immediately hated the command and dispatched Lieutenant Varnum if he let them go for a brief period of time. We crossed Muddy Creek and noticed that some lodged from the main trail on the Rosebud, so we headed in that direction to investigate where the muddy trail led. Custer stressed that he didn't want to lose any hours, reporting that the muddy trail rejoined the main trail further on, the main trail which became fresher by the minute. He wanted to retake the entire village and didn't want any remaining people to flee. Varnum, Boy, and a few scouts went ahead to reconnoiter the surrounding terrain. The men were told to graze their animals, eat dinner, and be ready to leave at 11 p.m. The men were instructed to deploy flarers to beds and keep a sharp eye out for any lodges that diverged from the we-passed areas where multiple camps had been close together, indicating the Indians were removing slowly and looking for grazing land. As the evening drew, Custer ordered we had it at dusk and set up camp on the trail, which was now very fresh. The night was very dark and our progress was slow. After marching about 10 miles, we dismounted the mules and everything was done to restand and recover the animals. During the night, the scouts returned and told Custer that they had located the Indian halted around 2 in the morning, unsaddled the horses, and allowed the men to rest. The packs were where Boy exclaimed that it was the largest village he had ever seen, and Reynolds' camp. We packed up and arrived at first light. Millie Boy and Reynolds, who had been out of them, cautioned that it would take 6 hours of intense fighting to scout, but said that the camp was enormous. On the morning of June 25th, the last day of March, Custer stopped the heist troops and the concealed divide where Lieutenant Varnum and Boyer were stationed. The general wanted to capture the area while Custer was away. I rode up the dry fork of the Rosebud following the trail, but I didn't get a glimpse of the village, which was on the other side of the divide, along the Little Bighorn. Custer was the best he could be. He was very orderly and rode about 4 miles up to the distant area for an hour or an hour and a half. Upon his return, Boy, who was with him, asked if I had seen the Indians. I replied that I had seen what appeared to be Indians. Boyer said, "You were within 150 yards of them, and you surprised them." They responded to the campaign as soon as they could. Custer sounded the officer's call and gave instructions, designating each officer's post and splitting the column into battalions. I rode with the scouts, and we followed a creek that flowed toward the Little Bighorn 4 miles before reaching the summit. The scouts, led by Lieutenants Varnum and Hare, then, as we approached the creek's mouth, we spotted a lone lodge on the bank. As soon as the orders were given, we advanced up the divide at a brisk pace, covering 3 or pressing on ahead a tagalop, with the command following at a rot. When we walked down from the hilltop, we saw a few Indians riding swiftly and appearing to be escaping. I said that the Indians were leaving, and we had to hurry or risk losing them. Upon the Little Bighorn, we saw a large dust cloud and fleeing livestock. Lieutenant Harrop wrote a note to Custer, but I'm not sure what it contained. I assumed that he shared our belief that the Indians were treating. Custer was nearby, riding at a fast pace. The scouts charged toward the abandoned lodge, slashing it open, and discovered a "my horse tripped," causing a brief delay, but I quickly caught up with Reno at the fort. As we crossed the river, I heard the Crow scouts warn each other that the Lakota were coming. Custer told Reno to take the scouts, lead the way, and I would follow. Reno immediately spurred his horses into a jog, giving him instructions to keep his horses under control. Custer arrived as we were inspecting the lodge, with Colonel Reno leading the headvance. I engaged the Indian inside. Reno paused for a moment, allowing the command to close ranks, and then crossed the small area. The Indians set fire to the timber on our right, and we continued moving forward without stopping, first at a halt and then at a gallop. A large force of Indians were in front of us, seemingly waiting for us to approach. We fired at a few Indians who were in the timber, but they did not return our shots. Shortly after that, we dismounted, and the soldiers formed a skirmish line, Bighorn, and forming a battle line on the prairie just beyond the timber. The formation was facing the hills. The line extended to the left and front, and firing started almost immediately as the Indians moved into the small clearing where the command regrouped and remounted. I was one of the last to reach the clearing, pausing at the edge to fire at some Indians who were moving to our left and trying to encircle us. Our horses were positioned near the base of the hills in the small valley, and the firing quickly intensified, infiltrating on our left and rear. I then joined the command, which was now mounted and formed in line of timber on our right and rear, and the soldiers sought cover among the bushes and small trees. Following a break-in, we were hit by a volley from the bushes. The soldiers managed to get back on their horses when Reno ordered the charge out of the timber, but not everyone in front of me and Reno on my left were struck. The volley claimed the lives of Black Knife and one soldier, who cried out, "Oh my God, I've been hit." I heard an officer shout, "Halt, men, halt, let's fight them." As I stepped onto the prairie, my horse stumbled and fell, throwing me off and bolting away. I retreated back to the timber, about 150 yards, and took cover among the bushes. The dust was so theron at an angle, heading toward the Little Bighorn River. The men were scattered, each trying to escape the woods as quickly as possible. It was thick, making it impossible to see where we were going. As soon as Reno's troops emerged from the timber, the Indians quickly closed in, attacking from some on foot and others on horseback, and I urged them to seek cover in the sides. After my horse threw me, I went back to the timber and saw Lieutenant Thay's soldiers promptly joined us, and we secured our horses to the trees. Just as we settled into Derudeo, we stopped to talk with him. As we spoke, a group of roughly dozens of Indians left from their attack on Reno's timber, where we could defend ourselves against the Indians. Our defensive position, firing below, indicated that Custer's forces had engaged the troops and were racing down the valley. The firing down the valley was intense and prolonged, with about 9 distinct volleys of men saying to me, "Boys, it's time we left." There were regular intervals punctuated by rapid intermediate firing, and the heavy firing continued for 3/4 of an hour to an hour before gradually falling into silence. I turned to the Indians and pointed out that the fighting below had stopped, and although the outcome was uncertain, I suspected the Indians had gained the upper hand. I warned that we should retreat before the Indians returned up the valley, and the men followed. We saw only 5 Indians between our position and Major Reno's. From about a mile away, the Indians launched a fierce attack on Reno's troops, which they continued until nightfall. The next day, June, we saw Reno's troops halted on a hill. I joined Reno at 5 p.m. On the 26th, the battle resumed at dawn and continued until 4 a.m. The men suffered greatly from emerging from the timber, and we saw large numbers of Indians advancing up the valley. They were swiftly repulsed by the Indians and forced back to their original position on the hill. As I ascended the hill, Reno's forces started moving in the direction Custer had taken, but they thirsted, and as many as even were wounded while trying to topple water. The number of Indians who assaulted Reno's army on June 25th could not be accounted for by General Custer until General Terry came with Gibbon's command in the morning, having surpassed 200 warriors. I think Captain Benten saved the fight on the hill. None of us knew with certainty what had happened on June 27th. Contrary to reports, the horses were not as cheerful as anyone who went into battle and might have fled before we could engage them. I don't believe Custer's engagement lasted for a long time. Our first impression was that the Indians were fleeing, and our only concern was that they were exhausted and the men weren't worn out and sleepy when we arrived at the battlefield. On a significant duration, it was undoubtedly concluded within less than 2 hours. I don't believe anyone had been killed before his retreat into the timber, and only one man the contrary. The animals were fresh, and Custer led a group of men who were well fed and had fallen when he made a break for the bluffs. However, at one point, the intensity of the firing led us to believe that Custer was moving forward, and the Indians seemed unsure of the outcome of the battle. They started and dismantled their daily progress as follows. 12 miles on the first day, 35 miles on the 2nd, and 33 miles on Rosebud's Mouth, where Custer started marching to the battlefield at the Little Bighorn's lodges and packing up the village, indicating they were getting ready for the battle. The distance from the 3rd day and between 25 and 28 miles on the 4th and final day, we left at noon on June 22nd and arrived at the battlefield around noon on June 25th. Contrary to popular belief, Custer did point out these men and horses by pushing them from my point of view. His movements during the march were deliberate, methodical, and exemplified soldierly conduct in every way. In fact, a heavily loaded pack train kept pace with us throughout the journey. I hope this first-hand account gives you a new perspective on the Battle of the Little Bighorn and the Great Sioux War of 1876. Stay tuned for videos like this. Have a great day, and I'll see you next time.